in any of these things. The verdict at the end of the inquiry was death by accident. Afterwards, a gentleman who was also at the inquiry walked back to the hotel with me. He had heard from Sir Percival's lawyer that a distant relation abroad would now inherit Blackwater Park. This was obviously the person who should have inherited it 23 years before. If I made Sir Percival's crime public, it would be to no one's advantage now. If I kept the secret, the true character of the man who had cheated Laura into marrying him would remain hidden. And for her sake, I wished to keep it hidden. I still could not leave Hampshire, as I had to report to the police station in Knowlesbury the next day. I spent another night at the hotel, and in the morning went to the post office to collect the letter from Marian. As promised, we had written to each other every day, and Marian's letters had been full of cheerful news. This morning's letter was short and terrified me. "Come back as soon as you can. We have had to move. Come to Gower's Walk, Fulham, number 5. I will look out for you. Don't be alarmed about us. We are both safe and well, but come back, Marian." What had happened? What dreadful thing had Count Fosco done while I was away? In spite of my anxiety, I had to wait. I paid my bill at the hotel and took a cab to Knowlesbury. At the police station, as I expected, no one appeared to continue the action against me, and I was allowed to go. Half an hour later I was on the train back to London. I got to Gower's Walk in Fulham at about 9 o'clock. Both Laura and Marian came to the door to let me in. Laura was much brighter and happier, full of plans for the future and for her drawing and painting. Marian's face was tired and anxious. I could see that she had spared Laura the knowledge of the terrible death in Welmingham and the true reason for moving to new lodgings. When Laura had left us and we could speak freely, I tried to give some expression to my feelings and told Marian how much I admired her for the courage and love she had shown. She was too generous to listen to me and turned the conversation to my worries. "I'm so sorry for my letter. It must have alarmed you." "Yes, it did," I admitted. "Was I right in thinking that you moved because of a threat by Count Fosco?" "Perfectly right," she said. "I saw him yesterday, and worse than that, Walter, I spoke to him." "Spoke to him? Did he come to the house?" "He did. Yesterday, when I was passing the window, I saw him in the street. Then there was a knock on the door. I rushed out, and there he was, dressed in black, with his smooth face and his deadly smile. I closed the door behind me so that Laura would not see or hear him." "What did he say?" I asked anxiously. "He greeted me, then repeated the warning in his letter to me. He said he had not been able to prevent Sir Percival's violence towards you, and he had found out our address in order to protect his own interests. You were followed, Walter, on your return home after your first journey to Hampshire. He used this information only when he heard of Sir Percival's death, because he believed you would act against him next." "And he was right," I said. "What did he say about me?" "He was very cool, very polite, and very threatening," said Marian. "He said, 'Warn Mr. Hartright. He has an intelligent and powerful man to deal with. Let him be content with what he has got. Say to him, if he attacks me, I will use all my power to destroy him. There is nothing I will not do. Dear lady, good morning.' Then he just looked at me with his cold grey eyes and walked away. I ran back inside and told Laura we had to move. We needed a quieter neighbourhood with better air for the sake of her health. I said you'd wanted us to do that, and why didn't we do it now to surprise you when you got back? She liked that idea, and was quite happy to move. I found these lodgings through an old school friend. I did the right thing, didn't I, Walter?" I answered her warmly and gratefully, as I really felt. But the anxious look remained on her face, and I saw in her eyes her continuing fear of the Count's cleverness and energy. "What do you think of his message, Walter? What do you plan to do next?" "I decided weeks ago that Laura will be received in her uncle's house again," I answered. "And my decision remains the same. Count Fosco will answer for his crime to me." Marian's eyes lit up. She said nothing, but I could see how strongly she supported this plan. "I know the risks are great," I said, "but it must be done. I'm not foolish enough to try this before I'm well prepared. I can wait. Let him think his message has produced its effect. He will start to feel safe. Also, my position towards you and Laura ought to be a stronger one than it is now." "How can it be stronger?" she asked, surprised. "Marian, I would like you to say to Laura, gently, that her husband is dead." "Oh, Walter, so soon? You have a reason for this, don't you?" "Yes, I cannot speak to Laura yet. But one day, not too distant, I want to tell her that I love her." Marian looked at me for a time, then gave a sad, gentle smile. "Yes, I understand. I think I owe it to her and to you, Walter, to tell her of her husband's death." The next day, Laura knew that death had released her from her marriage, and her husband's name was never mentioned among us again. Our life returned to its usual pattern, but I did not forget the Count. I discovered that he had rented his house in St. John's Wood for another 6 months, so I was fairly sure he would still be in London, within my reach, when the time came to act. We finally solved the puzzle of who Anne Catherick's father was. When I went again to see Mrs. Clements and to tell her about Anne's death, she remembered where Mrs. Catherick had worked as a servant. Her employer had been a Mr. Dunthorne. We wrote to Mr. Dunthorne, who replied with some very interesting information. Philip Fairley, Laura's father, had been a great friend of his when they were young, and a frequent house guest. He was a handsome man and fond of female company. Mr. Dunthorne was fairly certain that Philip Fairley had been staying at his house when Mrs. Catherick was employed as a servant, in the year before Anne was born. When Marian and I checked the dates, when we considered that Anne and Laura looked so alike, and when we took into account the fact that Laura looked very much like her father, we were in no doubt that here was the solution. Philip Fairley was Anne's father, and so Anne was Laura's half-sister. Now, at last, the woman in white, that strange, sad shadow walking in the loneliness of the night, could rest in peace. 4 months passed. Laura grew stronger in body and in mind. She was almost her old self, and when we talked, it was as we used to talk at Limmeridge. If I touched her by accident, I felt my heart beating fast, and I saw the answering colour in her face. In April we went for a holiday at the seaside. While we were there, I told Marian that when we returned to London, I was determined to force a confession from Count Fosco, to make him tell me the real date of Laura's journey to London. But if I am to challenge the Count, for Laura's safety, I think I should challenge him as her husband. Do you agree, Marian? With every word, she said. I parted you both once. Wait here, my brother, my best and dearest friend, till Laura comes and tells you what I have done now. She kissed my forehead and left the room. I waited by the window, staring out at the beach, seeing nothing, hardly able to breathe. The door opened, and Laura came in alone. When we parted at Limmeridge, she had come into the room slowly in sorrow and hesitation. Now she ran to me, with the light of happiness shining in her face. She put her arms around me, and her sweet lips came to meet mine. "My darling," she whispered, "may we say we love each other now? Oh, I'm so happy at last." 10 days later, we were even happier. We were married. Chapter 14. The Confession. A fortnight later we returned to London, and I began to prepare for my battle with the Count. It was now early May, and the rental agreement for his house ended in June. In my new happiness with Laura, to whom we never mentioned the Count's name, I was sometimes tempted to change my mind and to leave things as they were, but she still had dreams, terrible dreams that made her cry out in her sleep, and I knew I had to go on. First, I tried to find out more about the Count. Marion told me that he had not been back to Italy for many years. Had he been obliged to leave Italy for political reasons, I wondered? But Marion also said that at Blackwater Park he had received official-looking letters with Italian stamps on, which would seem to contradict this idea. Perhaps he was a spy, I thought. That might explain why he had stayed in England so long after the successful completion of his plot. Who could I ask who might know something? Another Italian, perhaps. And I suddenly thought of my old friend, Professor Pesca. Before I did that, I decided to have a look at the Count, as up to this time I had never once set eyes on him. So one morning I went to Forest Road, St. John's Wood, and waited near his house. Eventually he came out, and I followed behind him as he walked towards the centre of London. Marion had prepared me for his enormous size and fashionable clothes, but not for the horrible freshness and cheerfulness and energy of the man. Near Oxford Street, he stopped to read a sign announcing an opera, and then went into the opera ticket office, which was nearby. I went over to read the sign. The opera was being performed that evening, and it seemed likely that the Count would be in the audience. If I invite Pesca to the opera, I thought, I can point the Count out to him and find out if he knows him. So I bought 2 tickets myself, sent Pesca a note, and that evening called to take him with me to the opera. The music had already started when we went in, and all the seats were filled. However, there was room to stand at the sides. I looked around and saw the Count sitting in a seat halfway down, so I placed myself exactly on a line with him, with Pesca standing at my side. When the first part finished, the audience, including the Count, rose to look about them. When the Count was looking in our direction, I nudged Pesca with my elbow. "You see that tall, fat man? Do you know him?" "No," said Pesca. "Is he famous? Why do you point him out?" "Because I have a reason for wanting to know more about him. He's an Italian, and his name is Count Fosco. Do you know that name? Look, stand on this step so that you can see him better." A slim, fair-haired man with a scar on his left cheek was standing near us. I saw him look at Pesca, and then follow the direction of his eyes to the Count. Pesca repeated that he did not know him, and as he spoke, the Count looked our way again. The eyes of the 2 Italians met. In that second, I was suddenly convinced that, while Pesca may not have known the Count certainly knew Pesca. Not only knew him, but, more surprising still, feared him as well. The Count's face had frozen into a dreadful stillness, the cheeks as pale as death, the cold grey eyes staring in terror. Nearby, the man with the scar also seemed to be watching with interest the effect that Pesca had had on the Count. "How the fat man stares," Pesca said, looking round at me. "But I've never seen him before in my life." As Pesca looked away, the Count turned, moving quickly towards the back of the theatre, where the crowd was thickest. I caught Pesca's arm and, to his great surprise, hurried him with me after the Count. The slim man with the scar had apparently also decided to leave and was already ahead of us. By the time Pesca and I reached the entrance, neither the Count nor the slim man was in sight. "Pesca," I said urgently, "I must speak to you in private. May we go to your lodgings to talk?" "What on earth is the matter?" cried Pesca. I hurried him on without answering. The way the Count had left the theatre, his extraordinary anxiety to avoid Pesca, made me fear that he might go even further and out of my reach. In Pesca's lodgings I explained everything as fast as I could, while Pesca stared at me in great confusion and amazement. "He knows you. He's afraid of you. He left the theatre to escape you," I said. "There must be a reason, Pesca. Think of your own life before you came to England. You left Italy for political reasons. I don't ask what they were, but could that man's terror be connected with your past in some way?" To my inexpressible surprise, these harmless words seemed to terrify Pesca. His face went white, and he started to tremble. "Walter," he whispered, "you don't know what you ask." I stared at him. "Pesca, forgive me, I didn't mean to cause you pain. I spoke only because of what my wife has suffered from that man's cruel actions. You must forgive me." I rose to go. He stopped me before I reached the door. "Wait," he said. "You saved my life once. You have a right to hear from me what you want to know, even though I could be killed for it. I only ask that, if you find the connection between my past and that man, Fosco, you do not tell me." Then, his face still pale as the memories of the past crowded in on him, he told me the story. "In my youth, I belonged, and still belong, to a secret political society. Let's call it the Brotherhood. I can't tell you its real name. But I took too many risks, and did something which put other members in danger. So I was ordered to go and live in England, and to wait. I went. I have waited. I still wait. I could be called away tomorrow, or in 10 years. I cannot know. The purpose of the Brotherhood is to fight for the rights of the people. There is a president in Italy and presidents abroad. Each of these has his secretary. The presidents and secretaries know the members, but members don't know each other, until it's considered necessary. Every member of the Brotherhood is identified by a small, round mark, burnt into the skin, high up on the inside of their left arm. He rolled up his sleeve and showed me his own mark. If anyone betrays the Brotherhood, he went on, he is a dead man. Another member, a distant stranger or a neighbor, will be ordered to kill him. No one can leave the society, ever. Pesca paused, then continued. In Italy, I was chosen to be secretary. The members at that time were brought face to face with the president, and were also brought face to face with me. You understand me? I see it in your face. But tell me nothing, I beg you. Let me stay free of a responsibility which horrifies me. I do not know the man at the opera, he said finally. If he knows me, he is so changed or disguised that I do not know him. Leave me now, Walter. I have said enough. I thank you with all my heart, Pesca, I said. You will never, never regret the trust you have placed in me. Walking home, my heart beat with excitement. Here at last surely was my weapon against the Count. I was convinced he was a member of the Brotherhood, had betrayed it, and believed that he had been recognized tonight. His life was now in danger. What else could explain his extreme terror at seeing Pesca? And what would he do next? Leave London as fast as he could. If I went to his house and tried to stop him, he would not hesitate to kill me. To protect myself, I had to make his safety depend on mine. I hurried home and wrote this letter to Pesca. The man at the opera, Fosco, is a member of your society and has betrayed it. Go instantly to his house at 5 Forest Road, St. John's Wood. I am already dead. Use your power against him without delay. I signed and dated the letter, and wrote on the envelope, Keep until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. If you do not hear from me before then, open the envelope and read the contents. I then found a messenger, told him to deliver the letter, and bring back a note from Professor Pesca to say he had received it. 20 minutes later, I had the note, and as I was leaving, Marion came to the door looking anxious. "It's tonight, isn't it?" she said. "You're going to the Count." "Yes. It's the last chance, and the best." "Oh, Walter, not alone. Let me go with you. Don't go alone." "No, Marion. You must stay here and guard Laura for me. Then I will be easy in my mind when I face the Count." As I approached the Count's house, I passed the man with a scar on his cheek, whom I had noticed earlier at the opera. What was he doing here, I wondered. I sent in my card, and I still do not know why the Count let me into his house at 11:30 at night. Was he just curious to see me? He would not have known that I was at the opera with Pesca, and I suppose he thought he had nothing to fear from me. He was still in his evening suit, and there was a travelling case on the floor, with books, papers, and clothes all around him. My guess had been right. "You come here on business, Mr. Hartright?" he said, looking at me with curiosity. "I cannot think what that might be." "You are obviously preparing for a journey," I said. "That is my business." "I know why you are leaving London." "So, you know why I am leaving London?" He went over to a table and opened a drawer. "Tell me the reason, if you please." "I can show you the reason," I said. "Roll up the sleeve on your left arm, and you will see it." His cold grey eyes stared into mine. There was a long heartbeat of silence. I was as certain as if I had seen it that he had a gun hidden in a drawer, and that my life hung by a thread. "Wait a little," I said. "Before you act, I advise you to read this note." Moving slowly and carefully, I passed him Pesca's note. He read the lines aloud. "Your letter is received. If I don't hear from you before 9 o'clock, I will open the envelope when the clock strikes." Another man might have needed an explanation, but not the Count. His expression changed, and he closed the drawer. "You are cleverer than I thought," he said. "I cannot leave before 9, as I have to wait for a passport to be delivered." Yeah. "Your information may be true, or may be false. Where did you get it?" "I refuse to tell you." "And that unsigned note you showed me, who wrote it?" "A man whom you have every reason to fear." A pause. "What do you want of me, Mr. Hartright? Is it to do with a lady, perhaps?" "Yes, my wife," I answered. He looked at me in real amazement, and I saw at once that he no longer considered me a dangerous man. He folded his arms and listened to me with a cold smile. You are guilty of a wicked crime, I went on. But you can keep the money. All I want is a signed confession of the plot and a proof of the date my wife travelled to London. Good, he said. Those are your conditions? Here are mine. 1. Madame Fosco and I leave the house when we please, and you do not try to stop us. 2. You wait here until my agent comes early tomorrow morning, and you give him an order to get back your letter unopened. You then allow us half an hour to leave the house. 3. You agree to fight me at a place to be arranged later, abroad. Do you accept my conditions? Yes or no? His quick decision, his cleverness and force of character amazed me. For a second I hesitated. Should I let him escape? Yes. The evidence I needed to prove Laura's identity was far more important than revenge. I accept your conditions, I said. At once he called for coffee and sat down to write. He wrote quickly for quite some time. Finally he jumped up, declared that he had finished, and read out his statement, which I accepted as satisfactory. He gave me the address of the company from whom he had hired the cab to collect Laura, and also gave me a letter signed by Sir Percival. It was dated the 25th of July, and announced the journey of Lady Glyde to London on the 26th of July. So there it was. On the 25th of July, the date of her death certificate in London, Laura was alive in Hampshire, about to make a journey the next day. The Count then called in Madame Fosco to watch me while he slept. Early in the morning, his agent arrived, and I wrote a note for Pesca. An hour later, the agent returned with my unopened letter and the Count's passport. "Remember the third condition," the Count said as he left. "You will hear from me, Mr. Hartright." Then he and the Countess got into the agent's cab with their bags and drove away, leaving the agent with me to make sure I did not follow. As I watched them leave, another cab went by, and I saw inside the man with the scar on his cheek. What was his business with the Count, I wondered. I had seen him too often now for it to be chance. Perhaps I had fought my own battle with the Count just in time. You cannot get a signed confession out of a dead man. While I waited for the agreed half-hour, I read the document that the Count had written for me. Statement by Isidore Ottavio Baldassare Fosco. In the summer of 1850, I arrived in England on delicate political business and stayed with my friend Sir Percival Glyde. We both urgently needed large amounts of money. The only person who had such money was his wife, from whom not a penny could be obtained until her death. To make matters worse, my friend had other private problems. A woman called Anne Catherick was hidden in the neighbourhood, was communicating with Lady Glyde, and knew a secret which could ruin him. And if he was ruined, what would happen to our financial interests? The first thing to do was to find Anne Catherick, who, I was told, looked very much like Lady Glyde, and who had escaped from a madhouse. I had the fantastic idea of changing the names, places, and lives of Lady Glyde and Anne Catherick, the one with the other. The wonderful results of this change would be the gain of £30,000 and the keeping of Sir Percival's secret. I found Anne Catherick and persuaded her and her friend to return to London. I rented a house in St. John's Wood for myself, and obtained from Mr. Fairley in Limeridge an invitation for Lady Glyde to visit. For my plan to work, It was necessary for Lady Glyde to leave Blackwater Park alone and stay a night at my house on her way to Limmeridge. This plan was made easier by Miss Halcombe's illness. I returned to Blackwater Park, and when Miss Halcombe was out of danger, I got rid of the doctor and instructed Sir Percival to get rid of the servants. Next, we sent Mrs. Mitchelson away for a few days, and one night Madame Fosco, Mrs. Rubel, and I moved the sleeping Miss Halcombe to an unused part of the house. I left for London in the morning with my wife, leaving Sir Percival to persuade Lady Glyde that her sister had gone to Limmeridge and that she should follow her, breaking her journey in London at my house. On the 24th of July, with my wife's help, I got hold of Anne Catherick and took her to my house as Lady Glyde. However, when she saw no one she recognized, she screamed with fear, and to my horror, the shock to her weak heart caused her to collapse. By the end of the following day, she was dead. Dead on the 25th, and Lady Glyde was not due to arrive in London till the 26th. It was too late to change the plan. I remained calm and carried on. On the 26th, leaving the false Lady Glyde dead in my house, I collected the true Lady Glyde from the railway station and took her to Mrs. Rubel's house. The two medical men I had hired, shall we say, were easily persuaded to certify the confused and frightened Lady Glyde as mentally ill. Then I gave her a drug and had Mrs. Rubel dress her in Anne Catherick's clothes. The next day, the 27th, she was delivered to the asylum, where she was received with great surprise, but without suspicion. The false Lady Glyde was buried at Limmeridge. I attended the funeral with suitable expressions of deep sympathy. One final question remains. If Anne Catherick had not died when she did, what would I have done? I would, of course, have given her a happy release from the prison of life. Chapter 15. The Proof. When the half-hour had passed, I returned home. After a brief explanation to Laura and Marion, I hurried back to St. John's Wood to find the cab driver whom the Count had hired to collect Laura at the station. He wrote me a statement, which he and a witness signed, saying that on the 26th of July 1850 he had driven a Count Fosco to the railway station, where they had collected a Lady Glyde. He remembered Lady Glyde's name, he said, from the labels on her luggage. Then I went to Mr. Kirrell's office and presented him with the proof of Laura's identity. The letter from Sir Percival, the statement by the cab driver, the confession by the Count, and the death certificate. Amazed, he congratulated me, and agreed to accompany us to Limmeridge the next day, where I intended to have Laura publicly received and recognized. Early the next morning, Laura, Marion, Mr. Kirrell, and I took the train to Limmeridge. Laura and Marion stayed at first in a hotel, while Mr. Kirrell and I went to the house to deal with Mr. Fairley. He complained like a child, saying how was he to know his niece was alive when he was told she was dead? Between us, the lawyer and I made him sign letters calling all those who had attended the false funeral to come to the house the next day. As I led Laura into her childhood home the following morning, there was a murmur of surprise and interest from the waiting crowd of villagers and neighbours. The business was soon done. I read out the story of the plot against Laura, and Mr. Kirrell announced that everything I had said was proved by the strongest evidence. I put my arm around Laura, raised her up, and called to the crowd, Are you all agreed that this is the Laura Fairley you knew? There she is, alive and well. God bless her. It was an old man at the back of the room who began it, and in an instant everybody was shouting and cheering together. Later, in the churchyard, we watched a stoneworker remove Laura's name from the gravestone. In its place, he put this: Anne Catherick, 25th July, 1850. We returned to London the following day, happy in the thought that the long struggle was now over. Several days later, Pesca came to see me and asked for a quiet word in my ear. He had just returned from Paris. "I have news for you, my friend," he said. "You need not worry any more about the man at the opera. His body was found in the River Seine yesterday, and now lies in the morgue in Paris. He was killed by knife wounds to the heart." "Count Fosco is dead?" I said, amazed. "Are you sure?" "I saw the body with my own eyes. He was wearing a French workman's clothes, and had a different name, of course, but he was the fat man we saw at the opera that night, no question." "But how do you know this?" I asked. Pesca hesitated. "A man brought me some information," he said. "I had to see the body and send a report about it." "A man?" I said. "What kind of man?" "A stranger," said Pesca. "I didn't know him. A man with a scar on his left cheek." He saw the understanding in my face and held up his hand. "No more questions, my friend. Please." We never spoke about it again, but I think Pesca was telling me that the Brotherhood had taken their revenge. And so, Count Fosco, that extraordinary evil man, passed from this world. The following year, our first child was born, a son. 6 months later, my newspaper sent me to Ireland. And when I returned, I found a note from my wife saying she and Marion and little Walter had gone to Limmeridge House. She begged me to follow as soon as possible. Very surprised, I caught the next train. When I got there, Marion and Laura told me Mr. Fairley was dead, and that Mr. Kyrrell had advised them to go to Limmeridge House. Laura came close to me, and I half realized some great change was happening in our lives. "Do you know who this is, Walter?" Marion asked, holding up my little son with tears of happiness in her eyes. "This is the boy who will one day inherit Limmeridge House." So she spoke. In writing those last words, I have written everything. Marion was the good friend of our lives. Let Marion end our story.